Hello all and welcome to session 8 of Direct Tax 2 fourth semester paper of Mangalore University. Now in this particular session we are going to discuss about three very important concepts. Rules for self-occupied house property, deemed to be let out property and what are the related rules, and PCP interest, or we call it as pre-construction period interest. Now let's look at self-occupied house property. Now as far as house properties are concerned, there can be two kinds. One is let out house property and second one is self-occupied house property. Let out house property, as we are aware, this is for property let out by the landlord, maybe for a residential purpose or for commercial purpose, and the owner of the property is deriving rent. That is let out house. The second part is self-occupied house property, meaning to say I am not letting it out on rent, rather me and my family, we are occupying the house property. That will be treated as self-occupied house property. Now how do you treat the income from self-occupied house property? One very important point that we have to note is the annual value of a self-occupied house property is always nil, because we are not going to derive any rent out of that property. So the annual value is always nil. Deduction under section 23 municipal taxes for let out house property paid by the owner was available. In case of SOHP, no such deduction for municipal taxes paid is available. When it comes to net annual value, 30% standard deduction is available in case of let out house property under section 24. No such deduction is available. That is, no standard deduction is available. There is only one deduction which is available from a self-occupied house property, and that is interest on housing loan. But there are certain rules, there are certain conditions that the SSC has to follow. Only then this deduction of interest on housing loan is available from self-occupied house property. Important point: interest on loan borrowed for purchase or construction. I stress on the words purchase of a house property or construction of a house property. Maximum deduction available is rupees 2 lakh. So 2 lakh is the maximum amount that is available as deduction, and that too, this is on interest on loan borrowed for purchase or construction. Now, 2 lakh will be deductible as interest provided loan is taken on or after 1st of April 1999. That is a very old information, and you can say it is redundant. It is of less important to present time. And purchase or construction, if it is purchase, there is absolutely no problem. But when it comes to construction, that construction is completed within 5 years from the date of borrowing. So this is a very, very important rule. So loan is taken on or after 1st of April 99, and purchase or construction of that house property, that is self-occupied house property, is completed within 5 years from the date of borrowing. Now, important point: loan taken for renovation, adding an extra room, making significant changes, adding an extra floor, or repairing the property, or renewal of a property, redoing the painting, the electrical work and plumbing work and all other works, renewal more so, that is deductible only at 30,000 maximum. So interest on loan borrowed for purchase or construction, you can claim deduction up to 2 lakh rupees. But when it comes to renovation, repairs and renewals, as far as self-occupied house property is concerned, maximum amount of interest that is deductible is rupees 30,000 only. That is about self-occupied house property. The next concept is deemed to be let out. This is a very, very interesting concept that we have under the head house property. Now, what is this deemed to be let out? I have more than one, more than two house properties in my name. and I am not letting out that properties at all for rent. Suppose, let's imagine I have got 3 houses, and all 3 houses I am retaining it as a self-occupied house property itself, not deriving any rent at all. What does the income tax rule says? The income tax rule very clearly says the at any given point of time, the SSC owns more than 2 houses. More than two means 3 or more, and retains all the houses as self-occupied, then as per the income tax rule, SSC can claim any 2 houses as self-occupied. Suppose if I've got 3 houses, A, B, and C. Out of 3 houses, A, B, and C, I can take either A and B, or B and C, or A and C as my self-occupied houses, and the remaining house will be treated as deemed to be let out house property. Will be treated as deemed to be let out house property. It will be as if you have let out your house property. Now, what are the rules as far as deemed to be let out house property is concerned? The question of house remaining vacant does not arise. So you have more than, say, 3 or more properties, and none of the properties you have let out. Any 2 houses can be treated as self-occupied, whereas the remaining house, say third house, fourth house, and thereafter as many houses will be treated as deemed to be let out. Now, rules, the question of house remaining vacant does not arise. Question of unrealized rent does not arise because there is no tenant. So there is no question of unrealized rent. Expected rent will be taken as the annual value. Remember this, we had in the third step. First step comparison was the fair rent with the annual municipal value, among the two, whichever is higher. Compare that with standard rent, whichever is lower, that would be the expected rent. And as far as deemed to be let out property is concerned, expected rent will be taken as annual value. Now, whatever rules are applicable to a normal let out house, the same rules will be applicable for a deemed to be let out house property. That means you can claim deduction for municipal taxes under section 23. You can claim standard deduction and interest on housing loan deduction under section 24. So whatever rules are applicable for a regular let out house property, same rules will become applicable for a deemed to be let out property as well. Now, I mentioned about 3 houses A, B, C. Let's imagine A and B have the highest value right now. So I'm claiming house A and house B as self-occupied, and house C is treated as deemed to be let out. Say in the next year, suppose the value of house property C is more in comparison to house property B. So I can go for A and C as my self-occupied house property, and house B can be treated as deemed to be let out. So what I mean to say is SSC can change the house property as deemed to be let out every year with the basic objective of reducing the tax bill. So the SSC will have to work out and find out whose value is the highest, and the highest of the 2 house properties can be as self-occupied, and the annual value is comparatively lesser than the other property, that can be taken as deemed to be let out, with the idea that the tax bill of the SSC will be reduced. Now, suppose if the SSC has one big house property and it has got 3 or more residential units, one house property but 3 or more residential units, means parts more than 3 or more, you can say. If an SSC has one house property with 3 or more residential units, and if all such units are self-occupied, the annual value of the entire house property will be taken as nil, because it's only a single house property, remember. And no matter how many units are there, since it's a single house property, since it is not let out, entire house property or that annual value will be taken as nil as far as computation of income from house property of a self-occupied house property is concerned. The third concept is pre-construction period interest, or we also call that as PCP interest. If an SSC constructs a house, any interest paid by him during the period of construction, but before the completion of construction. During the period of construction, but before the completion of construction, such interest paid is called as construction period interest, or we also call it as pre-construction period interest, or we say PCP interest. Now, if the construction is completed during the year, then the interest for such period paid will not form a part of the construction period interest. Let's take example. Construction started, let's say, in the year 1718. It went on for 1819. And in the previous year, 1920, let's imagine the construction is completed. So interest of the previous year, 1920, the year the construction is completed, that will not form a part of construction period interest because the construction is completed. So interest for the year 1718 and 1819, whatever is paid by the SSC, that 2 years interest put together only will form what is called as construction period interest. Now, whatever interest that has been paid in the previous year 1718 and 1819, because the construction was not completed, the total interest will be available for deduction in 5 equal installments. That is from the year the construction is completed. That is, in the year 1920, entire interest paid for 1920 is available for deduction because the construction is completed. Along with that, whatever interest was paid in 1718 and 1819 put together, 20% of that will also be available for deduction as PCP interest, that is pre-construction period interest. So this is about the PCP interest, about deemed to be let out property and self-occupied house property is concerned. Thank you.